Anyway, okay, so now we get into the Darwinian evolution. Getting After getting done with this chemical evolution theory and some of the detailed philosophy. So this through this biogenesis, we don't know why. We don't know why this spontaneous generation of life cannot repeat itself. But once you have formed the first life form, then all those descendants, in other words, that was just a single event. And then no other such events are occurring in these days. No spontaneous generation of life ever have been observed in this. By the way, uh, I didn't really bother to include over here, but actually those are spontaneous generation of life to some degree, not the entire complete level of this new formation of new cell, but at least starting from non-living material to the certain complex macromolecules like amino acid, which is the building block of protein, have been demonstrated in the laboratory setting, simulated. In 1950s, uh, the actually he was the graduate student at the time, working toward the PhD degree, and then he walked this through by himself, uh, thought about and then building his own unique strategies, and then was able to demonstrate the whole spontaneous generation of such macromolecule in the laboratory specific tools. So at least we know that it is entirely impossible to build a complex molecule from simple molecule without anything, but spontaneously by simulating some of the primitive uh, atmospheric conditions. Still, it was possible to do so. And but anyway, still the question is, if that was the case, then why in these days we don't get to see any other additional event of such spontaneous generation? And there may be some several reasons. And one of such reason scientists believe that was the case is that I did not even go over that particular topic in the previous session, but this reducing atmosphere. This reducing atmosphere means that no oxygen is present in the air. And that is something, it might be something very important, because oxygen, if you have plenty of oxygen in the air, those oxygen will always interfere with this building, the anabolism, because oxygen is very greedy and oxygen is trying to break everything. So in the early stage of this atmosphere where no oxygen was present, it might have been more favorable to generate such spontaneous reaction because no interference from oxygen. But once you have reached to this type of a new condition in the air where plenty of a ton of oxygens are present, it is extremely difficult to engage in any chemical reaction, which is non-spontaneous reaction, okay, with unprotected this setting. That's it. Still, yeah, there is no proof. There is no proof, but that's one of such possibilities. So that's the reason why in these days, no additional such spontaneous generation of life can be easily observed. One possible explanation. Okay, I'm not saying that is the case, but one possibility. But anyway, so so whatever the reason, ever since all these life forms are generated through this biogenesis, okay, so from existing one to a new one through reproductions. Okay. So here, if that is the case, this gene and genetic variation turns out to play very important role, because this reproduction will continue on over a long period of time, and this reproduction basically involves your DNA, gene duplication, and the nature, chemical nature of your DNA as a gene is really tend to vary due to this mutation. So due to mutation, every different individual will have a different version of the genes. And if we continue on this trend over such a long period of time, we are talking about billions of years, okay, which is really more than enough period of time for creating such variation. So even we have started from a single such a whatever the Luca, you still remember the Luca, that the Luca must have been the result of such chemical evolution, but ever since then all those descendants of the Luca are different because of this reason, and this genetic variation will create this different organism, and now our modern nature will play some selective role on the given different environment, but as a result, finally, different species are done. Speciation is what we believe what has happened. Okay, so in other words, the single keyword of this biological evolution is this: the diversity. Through this evolution, you get to create different diversity of all different organisms living today. Okay? And as I said, the ultimate source of all this diversity, which is the variation, is only coming from the mutation these days. What is mutation? Change in the DNA sequence or chromosome structure. That's the dictionary version of the definition of this mutation. And so one such notable example of such a mutation is a base, nucleotide base. You know what I mean? Our base is nucleotide consists of sugar and base and the phosphate. This base, okay, base can spontaneously be converted into something else. Okay, if that is the case, then total disorder of gene can be changed. So, example, case in point is this. This is one particular base, which is a cytosine, okay, C. And it can be easily turned into totally different base, which is a thymine, spontaneously through this step. You don't have to worry about this actual chemical conversion, but one thing that this is suffice to know that this particular base, the component of the nucleotide, cytosine, can be changed into thymine for no reason, spontaneously, without doing anything. It can be done easily, okay, in the cell. And what's the consequence? If cytosine can spontaneously be changed into T, what would be the potential consequence? Originally, probably the C in the DNA, C must have been formed a partner with who? C will have a particular complementary base pair with C in your DNA. But if C changes into T, now this will have a partner with who? A. So you are simply change this whole new base composition with this spontaneous alteration of this base. That's one natural mutation. So even this can happen without any, like you do nothing and you are not exposing yourself into any nasty chemicals, right? You are not even smoking, you are not even drinking, or you are not even putting yourself under really strong sunlight for a long time, but still it can happen naturally, right? And consequence of this conversion can potentially be very significant if this alteration was like something that happened on the very critical important location position of your gene, then it can affect you really very seriously. After all, that one of such a famous disease, genetic disease, that sickle cell disease, was simply a result of the simple conversion of the one nucleotide into something else. And then as a consequence, the total hemoglobin protein has been altered into totally different. Oh, should I forgot that? I should have actually had that question asking about such the protein structure alteration relating with the sickle cell anemia and hemoglobin for this midterm exam, and I forgot. I should have. But anyway, so even this cytosine can also naturally be changed into uracil, yeah, like this. But in this occasion, uracil cannot come in DNA. Uracil can only come in the RNA. So even what I say is, even the DNA, the integrity of the DNA can be affected in that such a way that now a component of the RNA can happen in the middle of DNA. That's another such a potential possibility. Regarding this, actually, I have one very interesting feature about this uracil versus cytosine conversion and the importance of why thymine versus why in DNA thymine is there, whereas in RNA uracil is present. There is a very interesting idea and explanation, but I'm not going to go on, and I'm not going into that explanation because. But anyway, there is a reason why in DNA the thymine is one of such for nucleotide, whereas in RNA instead of thymine the uracil is there. There is a specific reason why, but just I'm not going to go into that actual details of the explanation. But anyway, so mutation can occur spontaneously. However, you can also speed up the rate of mutation. And those chemicals that can significantly speed up and then it can happen more frequently, we call such chemicals as carcinogens. The chemicals that can cause cancer is basically what the carcinogens are. So what does that mean? Basically, cancer is the result of DNA mutation is what it is. Okay. So the carcinogens are literally, by definition, any chemicals that can cause cancers. But in reality, what these carcinogens do is simply speed up or increase the rate of such DNA mutation. That's all. So several different carcinogens are there, like so many different chemicals and some like processed junk food and strong sunlight. And in the past, one of my favorite items of this, luckily I no longer rely on this particular uh, the hobby, so to speak, and some of the other nasty aerosol chemicals. All together, these are those who can increase your the cancer rate. Okay, and another disturbing fact is, even without doing anything, so you've been living so carefully, so you really totally cut off any instance or any opportunities for your body to be associated or exposing to any nasty carcinogen chemicals. But still this DNA mutation can occur during, in particular, what? During DNA replication procedure. At each round of cell division, your DNA must be replicated. So it is something that unavoidable. You always have to go through. But at each round of this DNA replication, your enzymes are stupid enough. Those enzymes who is responsible for doing this DNA replication is not perfect. And they will generate mistakes. Just like you're trying to dictate some of the long sentence, and then you always tend to have some of a typographical error on yours. And that's exactly what this enzyme do. It generates some errors. So in these days, what do you do? On your word processor program, you always has a built-in spell checker, right? Which is good. Your cell also, during the course of long evolution, yeah, of course, your cell also have equipped such mechanism of checking. Did you make any mistakes? Kind of during the DNA replication, did you insert any wrong DNA base? Just like you are doing this spell checker. But unfortunately, just like even in the presence of this spell checker, you still have some typographical error, which your spell checker cannot detect whether it is a mistake or not. Yeah, so is this your cell's spell checker system too. Okay, some mistakes go undetected. So that's why you always have some baseline mistake. Okay, so that is the source of your ultimate mutation. And hindsight, actually, some occasions that is a blessing in hindsight, because most of cases these mutations result in undesirable consequences. Of course, we know that. But very rarely, such mutation can generate a new function in the gene. And you are the result of such lucky break. So with all those mutations, those particular individual who unfortunately inherit such mutation, will have such a significant disadvantages. So they wouldn't have been able to produce enough offspring, so they were left out during the course of evolution. However, some of the lucky ones with the new function, as a result of this mutation, they have acquired new function, with which they can outcompete with others. So that's the result. So many variation and more like evolved individual eventually leading up to the new speciation is basically what has led us to this point. Okay, now here comes the oxygen thing now. So speaking of this heterotropic and the eukaryote, did I go over this thing before? The first form of the organism was a heterotropic prokaryote. Did I not, or did? If you're not sure, okay, I will just do it again. Let out. So the first cell, as a result of this chemical reversion, the first cell happened. So regarding this cell, whether this was the prokaryote or eukaryote, it's easy, right? Because prokaryotes are relatively simpler than eukaryotes, so prokaryotes must have been here before the eukaryote. Probably, yeah, our common sense easily can say that. But among those prokaryotes, which type of a prokaryote would have been the first form of life? Whether would it be a heterotrope or something the other, autotrope? Then what's heterotrope and then what's autotrope is the issue here. Heterotropes, by definition, is the organism that has to obtain their food from other organic material, just like us. Heterotrophs. In other words, heterotrophs do not possess the ability of converting the non-organic, inorganic material into organic material. Do you know the difference between inorganic and organic material? Carbon, yes, carbon. Organic materials are carbon containing, and inorganic materials are non-carbon containing. The only exception of chemical containing carbon, but still we consider it as inorganic, is carbon dioxide. But other than that, all other carbon containing chemicals are regarded as organic. What's organic? What's the significance of organic molecules? Because of the presence of this carbon, it can easily expand its dimension toward the huge extreme, isn't it? Because of this particular ability of carbon being able to form 4 different directions of a covalent bond, so it can expand its dimension to a huge, big molecule. So that's the starting point or prerequisite, we can say, to become macromolecules. That is the reason why we usually have a vocabulary like organic macromolecules, whereas we don't have any such the vocabulary of inorganic macromolecules, because it is almost impossible to have macromolecule made of inorganic. Because organic, the carbon containing thing, is the first step to become huge organic molecule. So that's why your foods are generally consist of organic macromolecules. Why? Because with that huge, big mass, body mass, that is something that contains enough energy in each chemical bond. So by breaking those chemical bonds, you are able to release the energy, and then with that released energy, you can do the necessary subsequent chemical reaction, metabolism, right? So that's the definition of the food. Food is the one that can provide you with the energy. How? By breaking the food molecule down, right? So that is the point, the reason why this organic material is important, because organic materials are basically the food. It can become food. So heterotrophs, yeah, duh. Food has to be organic material. So all those heterotrophs are those that has to obtain its food from other organic materials. Is there any other alternative way? In other words, the opposite, the different type of those organism, we call that autotroph, can have a special ability of converting inorganic material into organic material. Once you can convert, change the inorganic material into organic material, it becomes food. So you are able to generate your own food. Yes. That's what we call. So that's sorry. Autotroph. Can you name any example of autotroph? Those who can build their own food, autotroph? Name any example. Autotroph. Look outside. Oh, it's all dark, so you cannot see any longer. But if you once you look outside, you can see all those your friends, autotrophic friends. Plants are famous member of autotroph. Why? Because plants do what? You can say in Korean if you know. Yes, exactly. That's in English it's called photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is using the light energy, those plants can convert inorganic material, which is exactly the CO2, this inorganic carbon, into what? Food, which is glucose. C6H12O6 type of more complex glucose food molecule. That's what these plants can do. Exactly. Starting from inorganic material into organic material, which can serve as a food. That's a really nice function, nice ability. Of course, you cannot do this free because converting carbon dioxide into glucose, is this anabolic or catabolic reaction? Tell me. You starting from simple inorganic molecule to result in complex organic molecule. So which is what? Anabolic or catabolic? Anabolic is building. Starting from simpler to build the complex is anabolic. Catabolic is breaking complex down into a simple one. So this one must be anabolic reaction. So is this a spontaneous or non-spontaneous reaction? You are going uphill from simple to a more complex one. Is it spontaneous or non-spontaneous? Non-spontaneous reaction. So what do you need then? Energy, right? So that's why you need light energy. That's why we call that as a photosynthesis. You need some light source as an energy. Then with that light energy, can you convert this inorganic carbon into organic material? That's what this particular form of autotroph we call plant can do. But unfortunately, heterotroph like us cannot have this, cannot do this. Yeah, this really, if we can do this, life could be more beautiful for us, but we can't. So, for us, in order to obtain food, we have to start from organic material. That's our dilemma. And that's our fate dictate us as a miserable being, because where can we find the organic material? If you, for a whole day, if you dig in the soil, you cannot find any organic material. The only place you can find organic material is somebody else's body. Because organic, that's what the organic. All those organic material can only be found in the living material, or those body that once, at least just once lived. That's why, in order for us to survive, to get the food, we always have to sacrifice other lives. In order to get our food, we need organic material, and the place we can find organic material is somebody else's body. So we have to take somebody else's body. We have to eat them. That's the dilemma of heterotrophs. Wow. So by definition, that's heterotrophs, and autotrophs are there. But here, another big event of this autotroph. So what it's saying is, in the beginning, everybody was heterotrophs. Everybody was eating somebody else's. That's the whole like hell-like earth. But then some evolution occurred. Voila, some autotroph occurred, evolved. And the beauty of this autotroph is, not all, but most of this autotroph nowadays we can see is they not only can they produce this glucose from simple inorganic material, another thing is, during this procedure, as a byproduct, they generate what? They release oxygen. This is their byproduct. You make this, and as a kind of waste product, you produce also oxygen, and then dump this oxygen out to the air. That's the source of the oxygen in the air. In the beginning, what did I say? In the beginning, there was no oxygen in the air. And as more and more autotroph happen on Earth, as a result of their activity, the oxygen begins to accumulate more and more, and to become nowadays oxygen-rich atmosphere. Okay, so what is this? Well, example of the heterotrophs, but that's not really important. Okay? Some bacteria and some living small eukaryotic organism, and animals, including us, and also fungi, mushrooms, and molds, that they are all heterotrophs. And well, speaking of difference between, for example, animals and fungi are both heterotrophs, but the way they have the food into their system is slightly different. That we have this our stomach, or this animal. In other words, we take our food first into ourselves, and then afterwards we digest them. But fungi, what they do is they digest, they break down their food outside and then absorb. So that's the difference. Digestion first and then absorption later. Here, we absorption first and then digest later inside. That's a little kind of distinction between these two. But now, here, more importantly, these autotrophs, as I have already said, they have this special ability of synthesizing their own food from inorganic material. They can convert this inorganic material into organic material. Now these organic materials, everybody knows that organic materials are food. Okay. So the only difference is the starting point. Starting point is they can have this inorganic material like this carbon dioxide. So all this algae which can cover our rivers on all this green latte, they are the photosynthetic algae, and then plants and some bacteria also, they are all autotrophs. So according to this table summarizes some event, chronological order event. Like in the beginning, the Earth has been estimated to be formed like about 4 billion years ago. And then approximately 1 billion years later, wow, that was long, such boring time of 1 billion years until the first prokaryotic organism, prokaryotic bacteria cell, which must have been the heterotroph, of course, right? Occurred. How do we know? How do we know that actually about 3.5 billion years ago, the first form of prokaryote appeared on Earth? What's the evidence? Is that our kind of a scientific guess or what? Fossil record. Fossil, whenever you can find a fossil of a prokaryote, bacteria cell-like things, then you can estimate how old this fossil. Okay? And then it turns out that, oops, this fossil is something like 3.5 billion years old. Oh my gosh. Okay. It's such a long, old fossil. So that's how we ended up having this idea of. Now, what about the first eukaryote? Between prokaryote and eukaryotes, there's a big gap, like 3.5, approximately 3.5 years, 5 billion years. And on the other hand, it's the first eukaryote. It's about 1.8 billion years. So there's even more than billion years of gap between prokaryote and eukaryote. What did it take so long? And what happened in between? Oxygen. I mean, what's this oxygen got to do with this like first appearance of eukaryote? Is it any some kind of a relationship between? In other words, what I mean by that, like, does this oxygen appearance has to be there before the first the evolution of a eukaryote or anything? Any kind of link? Why there has to be such a long time between these? And also, on top of that, why in between there was like big accumulation of oxygen? Is it kind of a coincidence or something that was necessary for this evolution of a eukaryote or what? How am I supposed to know? I'm just a poor Munqua student. Don't ask me, right? You look like trying to say that, but try to give it a try. What kind of is there any relationship between oxygen and eukaryote? Then to be able to come up with such answer, try to find what's some kind of special feature do these all eukaryotes have in comparison with these prokaryote? Eukaryotes have what? Prokaryotes don't have what eukaryotes have. Of course, nucleus, right? But anything else? Eukaryotes also have organelle, right? Eukaryotes have organelle, but among those different organelles, do you have any particular organelle that particularly like strikes you as very impressive, giving you any lasting impression? Name any particular famous organelle that you know that are present in every eukaryotic cell. Do you know? Oh, you don't know. Okay, perhaps that's why. Have you ever heard mitochondria? Yeah, mitochondria. And mitochondria, what does this mitochondria do for us? Hmm? Make? What the? Breathe. Oh, actually, you're right, but the mitochondria really need the oxygen. Mitochondria, without oxygen, mitochondria cannot function. So the oxygen is something that actually the link between the presence of oxygen and the eukaryote is there actually. Mitochondria need the oxygen. And what does mitochondria do? ATP, energy. Mitochondria is a specialized factory, energy factory, just like a power plant that can generate energy. Of course, it is not correct statement that mitochondria generate energy. No one can generate energy, of course, right? However, you know what I mean. Mitochondria produce huge amount of ATP. So any given bacteria cell as a prokaryote can generate only very small amount of ATP, whereas eukaryotic mitochondria can generate huge amount of ATP. So in other words, a eukaryotic cell, thanks to the mitochondria, they can utilize huge amount of ATP. They can enjoy this such a luxury of big energy. And that is a reason, one of the reasons why they could afford to become larger. The bigger, if you want to bigger, then you need to spend more money, right? If you've been living in just a one room apartment, yeah, your lifestyle could be very humble, uh, modest. But if you decide to move into big, huge mansion apartment, you need to fill in a lot of these different stuffs. Okay, to do so, you need more money, energy. Okay, energy provide such like necessity. So with such huge amount of energy, now you could become bigger, larger. Without mitochondria, you cannot forget about it. You can't. So that's why, in order, so there is a oxygen. So for the first time, oxygen occurs over here. When oxygen was produced in the air, probably at first it must have been such a like the disaster for the majority of existing organisms because oxygen can kill. So a lot of mass extinction have occurred. Majority of the existing organisms, have died out due to the oxygen. But such disaster, to some, such an opportunity that a new life form has evolved. Those who can utilize this oxygen into like building some ATP in more efficient way. That's what mitochondria can do. And with the acquisition of mitochondria, now certain cell can become a new total dimension, totally different level of organism. Now we call eukaryotes. And this multicellular, why the multicellular organism only appear in the territory of eukaryote? You don't see any prokaryotic multicellular organism. That's another reason why this energy, to become multicellular like us, you should be able to generate much larger amount of ATP energy. Okay. So the ability to obtain more amount of oxygen is critical. That's why only later this multicellular organism appeared. And once you have, now all these events actually are believed to have occurred in the water, inside of water. Now some of the brave ones have kind of an attempt, thought that, hey, what if I just move out of the water and then go onto the land? Those early pioneers have all died instantly. Once they move out of the water and then go onto the land, they got killed immediately. Why? Because of this nasty ultraviolet lights coming on. Those lights are such a strong energy light, so any organism cannot handle such a strong light. But oxygen, once again, okay, provided such a blessing, protective blessing. Let me go on later. So multicellular organisms. So transition from sea to land. Plant first and then animals followed. But once again, whether being it plants or animal, those early pioneers must have been a miserable failure. They could not have survived. Why? Because this only after having enough oxygen, this oxygen can be converted to ozone on the very top of this our atmosphere, and this ozone layer can now lay the blanket, protective blanket, so that to reflect majority of this nasty, strong X-rays and ultraviolet light. All those are really, really dangerous, deleterious light source for us. And only then, now this land became habitable. Okay. So oxygens are, in summary, such oxygen produced as a result of this activity of autotroph in the beginning played two very important contributions to the evolution of life. One is to the generation of eukaryotes, right? And multicellular organism. Another thing is also allowing the transition of all these organisms from water to land. Two different contribution was actually provided by oxygen. And speaking of this oxygen's importance in the energy related body size can be also seen in this data. So in this data, on the y-axis, the oxygen level in the air was plotted. On this x-axis was like a time level. So at present, we do have certain level of this oxygen. Should I wait for her or what? So we know that at this level there are certain kind of certain level of oxygen is present. Then we also know that in the beginning, there was no oxygen, like I said, and then this thing gradually have increased. Must be thanks to the activity of those autotrophic organisms. And then at a certain time point, they have reached into the present level of kind of stable oxygen concentration in the air. However, particularly of particular note is this very narrow period of time when you have a really high peaked outburst of oxygen level for the very brief, relatively brief, okay, period. For whatever the reason, actually, there were times that our Earth's atmosphere had a much higher level of oxygen. But what's important on this point is during which this giant flying insect only present at the peak of its high oxygen level, period. What do you mean giant flying insect? Like dragonfly or any other insect? Current day, nowadays, size of dragonfly fly is only about this size. But if you saw like this big dragonfly, like that, can you imagine? That's what we say a giant flying insect. Yeah. In the fossil, yeah, there were such a big, much larger insects were there at that particular period. The question is why? Why we cannot see any giant flying insect anymore afterwards? That's something very tightly linked with related with this certain drop of this oxygen level into back to normal. And with that, all those giant flying insects are all also extinct, no longer present. So what's got to do with this? Because unlike birds, insects require much high energy for their flying activity. So in order to maintain such larger body, the amount of energy they must generate is huge. To do so, they have actually they require much higher level of oxygen in the air. That's probably the best explanation about this particular relationship. And what happened? We all know that what happened at the very recent event that wiped out the most dominant species, most dominant kind of animals on Earth, the dinosaur. The comet meteor hit certain part of, unfortunately, certain part of the land on Mexico, and the impact, aftermath of this impact, wiped out majority of something like 80% of all existing animals and plants, and with that, the most dominant kind of animal at the time are all gone, was what we all know, yes. But here, the point is to explain this. Once again, same common theme. The disaster to someone is actually an opportunity to somebody else. Yes. So, with sorry to say that, but thanks to that meteor impact that wiped out all those dinosaurs on Earth, and because of that, now we are possible here. The mammals. Mammals before was such a tiny little bit of minority, always trying to hide from the predatory action of those dinosaurs or anything like that. But now, once all those threatening, life-threatening dinosaurs are all gone. Now the size of mammals and also kinds of mammals both are rapidly expanding. Such phenomenon we recognize as this adaptive radiation. Like changes are so rapidly widespread to become more diversified in kinds and also in numbers within relatively very short period of time. And that is one such a mode of evolution. I'm not saying this is the only way of evolution, but a lot of times when evolution occur in certain different area locally, they follow this pattern we recognize as adaptive radiation. And the appearance of mammals as another next dominant kinds on Earth is another such example of this adaptive radiation after the extinction of that once dominant dinosaur on Earth. Okay, so so with the extinction of large reptiles, the dinosaurs, the mammals, and also in terms of the plants kingdom, these flowering plants or another such the who get the benefit of such extinction event of a most recent one. Okay, so in fact, actually, there are several different mass such extinction, and we are talking about the most recent extinction, which wiped out the 80% of the existing all those living things, including these guys. Okay? But before that, we do have another such extinction, and even this extinction, 95% of all those existing ones are all gone. So we are simply keep repeating all this pattern of regeneration and afterwards with different forms. So it's nothing new. So in other words, the next one will eventually come to wipe all of us out, and the new kinds will also become a dominant one. What kind of species will dominate then we don't know yet, but that's how life goes on. Anyway, so the thing is, so like there's media impact or any certain climate change or anything, such environmental change will result in such extinction of mass, big extinction of the existing community to provide the opportunity, the new opportunity for the once minority one to become new dominant one. So if those areas were totally vacated, so no one is there, then new one will migrate into that place. Okay, or some other times, very minor species will become dominant one. So which one? Either one is possible. So anyway, either way, this after they quickly those events will the differentiation event and the speciation event will quickly follow. And how those different species will emerge in such a quick short period of time is usually through adaptation into something called the new niches. That's what I want to explain, introduce this new terminology, which is niches. Niche. The niche is this is niche is in fact actually is not the specific only unique terminology in biology, but this is the definition of niche, some specialized place, like to store some artifacts in the building, is the original, the meaning of a niche. But then in biology, they adapt this niche into in describing some specific role of some different species in specific environment. That's when this ecological niche, the definition comes. So ecological niche includes uh, some kind of a species, some different species behavior, like including what they eat and how they interact and where they live, kind of all total collective behaviors. All those collective behaviors are the result of their specific adaptation to that specific environment. So, in other words, niche is a synonymous to role. Ecological niche is some kind of ecological role in a given specific habitat for a given species, is what how we can roughly define the term niche. So why they have this specific different niches? Because by doing so, each different species can significantly reduce the stress of a competition. It always is a very significant matter. If they can reduce this competition, then everybody can benefit. So, for example, in a tree, three different bird species can occupy different area as their specific niche, so that they can avoid fighting for the common resource. And another good example of such a niche is in on a beach area. By utilizing different sector of a beach area, different bird species can have their own different area of their habitation or an activity like that. So that's what this all this niche is about. So with that, in fact, what inspired Darwin to generate this whole novel idea of the evolution theory of evolution by natural selection was actually originally he discovered some phenomenon of this one example of such adaptive radiation in that famous Galapagos Island, where this Galapagos Island is the islands remotely isolated from mainland Ecuador. So one thing is these islands were originally on a no living bird species was there because there was a relatively newly made through volcanic eruption. So all these existing birds must have come from mainland, and in the mainland there was only one kind of bird. So this was the original bird who have migrated onto different island of that Galapagos island. But what he found was there were several different, in fact, 14 different species of birds were living according to the different area of the island. And what he has found is their habitat was something. No, it's not. Sorry. The reason why they had such a different speciation was totally depending on different food sources. So some specific island, when the food sources were limited into very tough, big seeds, and there this the size and toughness of the beak has to also develop into accordingly to a tougher one. And some other areas where no plants food source were available, and then sharp this the the size of this appearance of this the part mouse part was very adaptable to pick the insects as the prey. So with this, whole different species of birds has emerged from the original single species of birds, as what Darwin has found, and he formulated his idea of evolution. So this is perfectly very good example of such adaptation, and according to the different ecological niche. And such different niche utilization can also be found in other area of, like, for example, in Australia and also in particular New Zealand. uh, Several very endemic, unique animals can be found. For example, a bird like ostrich, like bird, moa bird in New Zealand, no longer exist. They are all uh, recently, relatively recently, all extinct. But because there were no mammals in that area, so their ecological niche was very similar to that of this deer in other area, other land. Another example is the kiwi bird, the famous New Zealand kiwi bird. Like other area of like North America and some other area, badgers would have been easily found, but no mammals in New Zealand. So exactly these roles played by badgers were like replaced by this kiwi bird. So this is another example of such ecological niche playing through adaptive radiation. And also very unique bird can only be found in the New Zealand rock wren bird is actually doing like very similar to this mouse in other area. So, and I have also mentioned earlier in the first lecture, the insect metamorphosis is another example of such niche utilization. Here, the difference is, unlike other niche utilization, which is played by different species, but the same individual, they are changing its form according to their different developmental stage is what's unique. But the consequence is also all the same in that by employing these different stages of differentiation, they each different stage of a single individual can significantly reduce the stress of competition, because at each different stage they can utilize different food source, so they don't have to compete. So it's kind of a funny word. They are not they. It's the same individual, but each different stage does not have to worry about competing with the same source of food, for example. So that's how they can do this. Okay, so there are several different type of mode of speciation, but yeah, you have been tortured long enough today, so I'm sorry. Yeah, I totally forgot that today I had such a very short break. Total, I'm sorry. So I should have actually dismissed this class way earlier. My bad. I apologize. But so I will just end this. Once again, thank you for coming, and so I will continue on this next week, the the mode of speciation and the rest of them. Okay, so good luck for your exam, other exams, and have a nice weekend.